In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, Kevin, you can take it away.
Okay, hi everyone. Sorry about that. I was just disconnected. I have my Wi-Fi again. But as for the intro, Dr. Panzarella vice uh, recently served as the vice chair of the Board of Regents here at Chaminade University. And this past summer, he's been appointed the director of the Hogan Entrepreneurial Program. Dr. Panzarella is a great fit to the head of the Hogan program, as in his career, he has been a great example of a leader no matter where he went. To start, Dr. Panzarella received his bachelor's degree from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, and later he pursued his master's in human development and in international relations from Boston University and the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, respectively. On top of that, Dr. Panzarella also received his PhD in organizational leadership from the University of Oklahoma. With all the education Dr. Panzarella has received, he put it into great use throughout his career. First, he served as a colonel in the Army. Later, he was the chief executive of Lockheed Martin, United Arab Emirates, and also he was Lockheed's deputy regional executive of the Middle East based in Abu Dhabi. Dr. Panzarella later took his career into academia, where he wore many hats, one being the Dean of Student Affairs at George Marshall Center for Security Studies in Germany. And finally, prior to joining Chaminade, Dr. Panzarella was the Vice President of Pacific Operations for the Ala Kaina Foundation's family of companies. With everything I mentioned, it is just a brief list of the positions and places that Dr. Panzarella has been to. Therefore, we couldn't have had a better or more qualified speaker to participate in today's Share the Joy of Cultural Intelligence. So now I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Panzarella.
Thank you, Kevin. In 1995, I went to Moscow on business. I was a young lieutenant colonel visiting friends on business, as I said, at the U.S. Embassy there. And in that role, in that business role, I was invited to a birthday party of a Russian general. So my American colonel friend and his wife took me to this soiree, if you will, this birthday party for this general. And there I was in Moscow in this fairly small apartment with a bunch of Russian officers where one was expected to drink and consume quite a bit of vodka. And lesson learned, never try to drink vodka at the same level of the Russians. Anyway, the evening proceeds, and as things go with Russians, you have to do things in order. And I had not only the 4th toast, but I had the 11th toast. So you can imagine, after so many shots of vodka and not knowing all the tricks of the trade about watering plants with vodka, I tried to be the great American and keep up with the big Russian generals. So by the 11th toast, I remember standing up and rehearsing my toast because all this is happening in Russian. I remember standing up and having rehearsed my toast thinking, you know, just be calm, be cool, get it out there, be respectful. And then what came out of my mouth wasn't quite Russian. It just felt like some kind of gibberish of Russian and English. So we got through that next few toasts, and then it came time, because we had given a gift to the hostess of the house. We had given her her first ever turkey. She had never had a turkey before. They had never had, in this house, they had never had one of our famous American turkeys, butterball turkey. They managed to fit it in their small oven in their small apartment, and they cooked it. So you can imagine by now I'm feeling just a little tipsy, and my American friends elected me to cut the turkey because of the tradition of cutting turkey and the joys of Thanksgiving turkeys, right? So they invited me into the kitchen. Again, feeling a little tipsy, but in control. And they handed me, young hostess, wife of the general who has had a birthday party, handed me a butter knife, a large cake knife, if you will, very dull. And I was supposed to cut this beautiful butterball turkey with this butterball type knife, right? Anyway, it didn't go very well. Combination of factors. I end up hacking this turkey as the most ugly, my father would never be proud of me of cutting this turkey the way I did, but I hacked this turkey miserably, and I put it in a pile in this aluminum pan, and it was piled high of all these shards of turkey. And the hostess looked at me, and in Russian, she said, and you can figure out the Russian, she looked at me and she said, "To jest amerykańska tradycja?" This is an American tradition? Because she had heard about this. And so I looked at her and I said, "Конечно, of course. To jest amerykańska tradycja." And so you can imagine that today, to this day, every year, they cook a butterball turkey on Thanksgiving, and they hack it miserably and serve it and say to everybody, "This is the American tradition." So, the joy of presenting this Zoom presentation in front of you without any feedback whatsoever, I've told that story enough to know that it's one enjoyable. But I thought it was a nice way to start this session with you, to visit with you a little bit and talk about not only the joy of cultural intelligence, but the power of cultural intelligence. And that was a big fail. In my opinion, it was a big fail. So throughout the story, throughout this presentation, for the next, let's say 15 or 20 minutes, I want to talk to you about my favorite topic. And this is one of my very, very favorite topics to talk about. I'm in the process of writing a book about it because of my background. Now, I know Kevin talked to you a little bit about that, and I want to thank him for that gracious introduction. But having lived in my entire adult life I'm counting now, depending on how you count it, 9 or 10 countries for most of my adult life since college. And I counted them up today. In Germany, I lived for 12 years. In Poland, I lived 10 years. In Italy, 2 years. Belgium was 2 years. Russia was just less than a year, or maybe just a little over with all my TDYs there. Korea, I spent a year in. And then Kevin mentioned the United Arab Emirates. I spent 6 years in the Middle East. And then Iraq, I was in Iraq as a soldier, less than a year. That was more like 10 years, it felt like, but it was less than a year. And then I am now including US and Hawaii as my next foreign country that I've lived in, because my brain has been completely rewired, if you can imagine, having almost never lived on the mainland since I was a young person. My brain's been rewired to all these countries and all these cultures. So I thought I would share the joy and power of cultural intelligence. And if there's anything that's made me reasonably successful in life in these countries, it's my respect for the culture. It's my respect for being in that country and demonstrating a modicum of an awareness of the language, customs, traditions, and habits. So Maimoa, if you would move to the next slide. And again, I'm developing a course on cultural intelligence, and we could spend weeks and weeks and weeks talking about this. There are so many books. I've got them all over my office. I just picked some things to talk about. I'm going to share some anecdotes to keep it light and some a little heavier. But I want to talk to you a little bit about what I think the value of cultural intelligence is and why I say it's the joy, because certainly there's sadness there as well. But if you're a business person, which I'm partially, I suppose, because I'm here at the Hogan program, and I spent 15 years in business, 30 years in the military, and more doing other things. But a working definition, you'll have to know that in my opinion, that cultural intelligence is simply the capability to function effectively across national, ethnic, generational, and organizational cultures. And it doesn't just have to be countries. It can be within an organization as well. Within Chaminade, within the university system, within Hawaii, within Honolulu. There's all this cultural intelligence that you could talk about. Fact is, I got this out of, not yet, the 70% of all international ventures will fail because of cultural issues. It came out of Harvard Business Review. I don't know if I can dispute that fact, but I'm using it, and I don't doubt it because of my experience having lived in so many foreign countries and seeing so many American delegations coming over, trying to do business, trying to, whether it was government or business, trying to do something, achieve some objective there. Next slide, please. So what's my return on investment if I work hard at enhancing my, we're going to call it CQ. You have IQ for intelligence quotient, you have EQ for emotional quotient, and the latest in scholarly work is CQ, which is cultural quotient. And we'll just call that cultural intelligence. Here's what we know. Leaders with high CQ or cultural intelligence have a higher productivity and less likely to burn out when they work across cultures. Leaders with high CQ or cultural intelligence are better able to diagnose complex situations and make good or effective decisions in those cultures or in that environment. I can give you factually tell you, since it's happened to me many times, that I was very better able to negotiate successfully across cultures because I was armed, I suppose, with what I thought was the empathy that I had for the culture and for respect for the knowledge of the language, the habits, the customs, the traditions. And then I was better able to bring technical, let's call it acumen or knowledge, with me into that cultural context. I saw many engineers try to come into foreign countries and try to bring that technical, that vast technical knowledge that they have into the culture to solve a problem and bust because they didn't know how to put it in a cultural context. That's interesting. Are you guys seeing all my emails? That's pretty interesting. That was just me. Can you just see the slide? Okay, thanks, Paul. Then let's talk about trust. So in order to build trust within that culture, you also have to be able to function and develop those relationships, again, with that cultural intelligence. So overall, to be a more effective leader in a culturally diverse situation, you need to improve or work on your cultural intelligence factor. I think something that I did fairly successfully. I don't pat myself on the back many times, but this is something I work really, really, really hard on in all these countries. And I'll tell you that there's blowback for it too. You can work really, really hard for 5-6 years working in a foreign country, but the mothership is back in, let's say, Bethesda, Maryland, or wherever, or Washington, D.C., and the thinking can be, oh, Panzarella has gone native. He's thinking too much like that foreign country, and he's not protecting our interests. So it's a delicate balance that I had to protect all the time. And here's the other thing I want to say, that all of this is coming from an American cultural perspective. There are other cultural perspectives to come at cultural as an American having lived overseas, but it's also, call me a European or call me a Middle Easterner, because of all the years I've lived abroad, I bring that filter into it as well. So I think I'm critically thinking when I'm reading all of Harvard Business Review's books and articles on cultural intelligence and what it means. But one of my students gave me some constructive criticism, and she came from a foreign culture, and she said to me, very interesting approach you have to cultural intelligence, but really not what I think it should be, because you're coming at it as an American. I try not to do that. I try to make myself more neutral when I talk about cultural intelligence. I'm going to get a little academic for a couple minutes before I tell you my next story. And that is the relationship between your personality and cultural intelligence. And for those psychologists who study personality, they call it the top 5. There are 5 things that are basically measured in personality. And we'll go through them very briefly. But I'm more interested in is the relationship between those top 5 and the factors of cultural intelligence. So as an academic or a theoretic setting, that's this linkage about those things. So next slide, please. It's gonna look a little busy, and you don't really have to pay attention to it, but I would just tell you, you can be tested for all these things. Those of you who have done the Myers-Briggs test or the Keirsey temperament test or any California psychoanalytical test, whatever it is, you can find out who you are. You can do a self-inventory to see what level of extroversion you are, what level of agreeableness you are, conscientiousness, and emotional stability. And I just want to walk through a couple of these things because people assume that if you're an extrovert, that just means you talk a lot, you talk loud, and you move your hands like I do as an Italian. And it's, you know, it's basically the difference between an engineer and everybody else. An engineer is quite introverted, doesn't say much, it's more internal. Actually, it's a lot deeper than that. And it really means, in my opinion, it's how you regenerate energy yourself. In other words, if I'm an extrovert, the way I measure, I suppose the way I measure or the way I determine to what degree of extroversion I have is after an event with people, it's what I do to recharge my batteries. Good example is my wife and I. My wife, flaming extrovert. Me, much more, as I get older, much more of an introvert. So my wife can go to an event, a party, a reception, whatever, and she will, I say, plug into everybody. She'll come home and she'll have all kinds of energy. She will be charged up and discussing and talking. I come back and I'm exhausted. It takes everything out of me. And how do we recharge our batteries? She's already recharging her batteries, just reiterating the stories. I need to get into a book. I need to get into something that very quietly to recharge my batteries. So that's extroversion. Agreeableness is just, let me just say it's like likability. Is this person likable or not? Conscientiousness is just whether you're disciplined and you have plans and you're organized. Emotional stability is what it says. And then openness to experience, very interesting, because in this case with cultural intelligence, it has to do with curiosity. Are you an imaginative, and are you open to varying experiences and perspectives? So if you look across the top, you see cultural intelligence, drive, knowledge, strategy, and action. To what degree does cultural intelligence drive play in this with personality, knowledge, strategy, and action? If you look at the columns and horizontally what it looks like, to me it looks like that person who's very curious or open to experience has the greatest chance of being, I suppose, culturally intelligent. Okay? I just wanted to give you a little bit of an academic setting there. And then if you'll go to the next slide, I want to talk, and I'm not going to go through these because this looks like a lot of big words, but we could talk about so many issues, but I want to pick one issue to finish with in the next few slides, and that's about nonverbal communication. Everyone knows, I think everyone knows, 70% of a message that's transmitted from person to person is done non-verbally. It's not about the words. And at this point in my presentation, a lot of you are just kind of hearing my voice droning on and on, but it's about my passion. It's about my gestures. It's about my facial cues that you're getting. And that's what all those words are. I call them the icks, the ICs or the icks. Those are the differences, because nonverbal communication measures time, space, movements, touch. You see all those, right? The sound, the pitch of your volume. And it actually depends on the culture from which you come, how you grow up and what that means. What cultures do you know where space, you can violate somebody's space and be very close to them? What cultures do you know where time has a different construct for them? Where you can touch somebody or keep your distance from somebody, or they're only looking at your eye movement in your face, or they won't look at your eye in your face. Nonverbal communications, to me, is absolutely fascinating. The anecdote I want to talk about here, and this is a fun one, okay? I'm a business executive with Lockheed Martin. I live in Poland at this time. At that time, I had 12 countries, of which Bulgaria was one of them, doing business in Bulgaria. And I had been there over the course of a couple of years, many times doing business. But this particular day, I arrived and I was sitting across from three gentlemen who all were working for one company. One was the CEO, one was the COO, the Chief Operating Officer, and one was the CFO, Chief Financial Officer. The goal of this company was to work for Lockheed Martin. They wanted to be one of our consultants. But you can't do, it's difficult to work for us, Lockheed Martin, unless you agree to play by our rules. Difficult environment, you know, Bulgaria, Russia, Slav countries, it's kind of difficult. So you've got to sign up to a set of standards and procedures to work for our company, right? Well, here's the fun part of this. I sat there and I sat across from all three of them. I said, in about 2 hours, you're going to get a call from our corporate lawyer. He's going to ask you the same questions I'm going to ask you. So let's rehearse them. First question he's going to ask you is, will you, three gentlemen, as the leaders of this company, agree to abide by all the Lockheed Martin policies, procedures, processes that are all associated with the U.S. government in terms of its honor, ethics, and, you know, all the things that you know about honesty and tradition, right, within a culture and within business. In unison, all three go like this. And it stunned me. I didn't know what to do. I'd flown all the way from Warsaw to Sofia, Bulgaria, to do this interview, and it's about to go bad. And the corporate lawyer, the guy in charge of all Lockheed Martin corporate lawyers, is going to interview them, and this is going to be a bust. So I said, oh man, maybe I should do this in Russian. So I switched, and I did in Russian, and I asked them, I said, will you gentlemen agree to abide by blah, 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 all the ethics, honor, procedures, and all that. And in unison, all three go like this. And I panicked for a second. I said, wait a minute. I'm in Bulgaria. This gesture means yes. You know, it's not the nodding of the head, it's the shaking of the head that means yes. And it kind of just threw me off guard. And even that night, getting into a taxi, I asked the taxi driver if he would take me to a certain place. And he said, he gave me that symbol, and he just shook his head a little bit. And I thought, oh man. And I thought, okay, you just have to know what culture you're in. You have to know where you are and understand the differences. That's the point, the anecdote I wanted to share with you on that. Next slide. And don't want you to pay attention to this slide because this is part of the course that I'm going to start to develop. But I do want to go, I'll tell you what they all are if you're interested, and we can do Q&A. But the one that's I like to harp on is the last one. It's high and low context cultures. And if I could just reduce that to what I think it means that around the world, you can go to different countries. And those of you who've lived in foreign countries or come from foreign countries, you're either considered high or low context. What does that mean? It means, how is a message transmitted? With high context or low context, in the sense that, is everything integrated into that message that I send to you? Is everything integrated? In other words, in the German American low context culture, if I say something to you, Pono, I'm in the German culture, I tell you something, everything you need to know about that is embedded in my statement. High context culture, we'll talk about which ones they are. Japanese, Chinese, Korean, many of the Asian cultures. It's high context. It's not so much about what's being said, it's all the other things wrapped around it. And this is where nuance comes in. This is where a lot of the nonverbal behavior comes in. So I just want to talk a little bit about that in the next slide. High context, low context. No surprise here. And then it doesn't have all the countries in there. It doesn't have all the cultures, but with the right-hand side, with the high context cultures, you can see that's also where you would place the Japanese and the Korean culture. Now, I realize we're not stereotyping, and there are degrees of all these things, but just keep it in your brain. Generally, this is how academics view high context versus low context cultures. I'm doing okay on time. Yeah, lowest context cultures: Germany, Switzerland, US, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Denmark, and Canada. Next slide, please. I'm going to end, I think, with this one, and that is my 6 years in Abu Dhabi. I took something away. I want to show you this book that they gave me when I first arrived. It's called Don't They Know It's Friday? And theoretically, this is written from, let's say, an Arab/Muslim perspective about Westerners coming to the Gulf states, but very applicable. And it took me quite a while to get used to these different customs and traditions about who shakes hands with whom. Women don't shake hands. You know, it's always hand over heart. Always. It's usually hand over heart when it comes to a woman, although this is changing. Men will shake hands vigorously, right hands. The only people that hold hands are generally men. Women generally don't hold hands. This thing about kissing, I've seen it in the culture here in the Pacific Islanders some of the Pacific Islands have the culture of going nose to nose, but it's also there in Abu Dhabi. And one time, a general from an Emirati general came up to me. We were getting to be good friends. He grabbed my hand and he said, "Roy, we're going to go nose to nose for the first time." He said, "But do not kiss me," because he had this misfortune of having Westerners, you know, because he goes nose to nose, and he puts it nose right up to him. He said, "There's no need to kiss." I put this thing up there, flesh, feet, and fingers. It's not appropriate to show for women to show anything below, you know, elbows, depending on which country you're in. Never appropriate to show your feet. And that's why you see sometimes in some of these news stories where you see men with their slippers or their shoes hitting something with the shoes, because the bottom of the shoe is the dirtiest part of the body, and using the feet and showing the bottom of your feet and hitting something with a shoe or throwing a shoe at somebody is about as bad as you can get. And there are things about fingers. In other words, you know, things you have to pick up there after a while. It's not nuance, but we have a tendency in the West, if you want somebody to come with you, you would just use this gesture, right, of using your fingers in this upward sense. It's very bad to do that. What they prefer is, if you want to use that, is just use your fingers in this way. You would make this motion if you want somebody to either follow you or come along with you, but it's very bad. They don't like crossed legs. It's a sign of disrespect if you're in a meeting. There's this thing called the right of way, al-yamin, that the person on the right always has the position of respect. So that person always goes through the door first. That person is the first one off the elevator. That's the first person to do anything. And there's this art and science of moving to the right. And I caught myself very easily getting into this notion. If I got into an elevator, I would always move myself to the left very quickly so that I could always gesture to people on my right to get off first. It's a demonstration of respect for a culture. Small things, right? And then finally, one of the more fun ones is this paying the bill. And I had some videos I wanted to share with you, but there were too many of them and I didn't know how to separate them. But this is a hilarious thing that you're in a group with a bunch of, let's say, Arabs in general, but I don't want to just distinguish between Arab and Muslim because there's a difference, but you're in a group and it's time, you're in a restaurant, it's time to pay the bill. There's always this huge fight about who's going to pay the bill. And I was told by one of my Arabic friends, he said to me, he said, but make sure you make sure you fight back 3 times. He said, because that's generally the accepted thing. You'll fight back 3 times and then that person can pay the bill. And what I mean by that is, one time I played this game with somebody and the bill came for the dinner. And I said, let me pay for this, Saeed. And he said, no, I'll pay. I said, no, let me pay. And he said, no, I'll pay. And I said, okay. And then he looked at me in stun and he said, you're supposed to ask me 3 times. He didn't want to pay the bill. I said, give me that bill. So I took it. Anyway, and there's so many stories like that. It's hilarious. There's a video that's gone viral. I couldn't find it. I want to find it for you. And it's in Arabic, but you don't have to understand the language. But it's this thing about al-yamin, going to the right. 2 best friends going to a restaurant. And they finally get to the door of the restaurant. And the one says to the other one, please, you go. He goes, you're on the right. And the guy says, no, I'm older. You go. No, you go. And they go back and forth and they're fighting each other over who goes through the door. Well, flash forward an hour, they're still fighting over who's going to go through the door. And then the video leaps forward to the next morning and they're both sitting there cross-legged looking at the door of this restaurant and they still can't decide who's going to go through the door first. So it's a parody and kind of a fun story about the way they take these traditions, making fun of themselves as well. But it's just this awareness, and they do like it. That does show respect. That's a difficult language, but if you show a little bit of respect by learning some of the words, learning some of the culture, learning some of the traditions, it can pay off. And not just in business. It pays off in relationships. It pays off in understanding how to move this human condition, I think, forward. And I think that's it for slides. Do you have any more? Look at that, 40 minutes, not bad. Okay. So I went through that pretty quickly. There's the academic piece, there's the theoretical, that theoretical piece, and then there's the anecdotal piece as well. And I've got stories that'll come out in my book and you'll have to pay a lot of money to read that book. No, I'm kidding. If you're on this call, you get the book for free. So that's all I have today. Who's ever going to open up for questions, I would be open to answering almost anything.
So
Hi, Dr. Oh,
go
sorry.
ahead. Sorry.
I did have a question. I was just very curious, given your extensive background, it's very interesting. And so I was wondering, how did you find Chaminade, or how did you find your way to our home, if that makes sense? How did you come to Chaminade? That's my big question.
Great question. I can't see who's asked the question.
Sorry. Oh, my name is Taylor. Sorry, my camera is off right now, but.
Oh, there you are. Okay, I got you. So well, very simple. My wife was born here when Hawaii was a territory. She was born at Tripler. Her dad was in the Navy back then. Her sister was born here. My son was born at Wahiawa General back in the 80s when I was stationed up at Schofield. And my best buddy in the whole wide world is a guy from Molokai, and many of you may know him. It's Vaughn Vasconcelos. Vaughn and I went to West Point together back in the 70s. And so since then, we've been very close. And so one day I was in Poland, he called me up and he goes, "It's time for you to come home, brother." And so I came back and worked for him for 4 years. And with that, I got to tell you a funny story. I got a bunch of them. But part of my job in the last 4 years before I joined Chaminade was I was on Kauai, and I had a contract there on Barking Sands, and this beautiful, elegant woman, older woman from Kauai, she walked up to me and she said, "Hey, I understand you know Vaughn. How do you know Vaughn?" And I said, her name is Kauai. I said, "Vaughn and I went to school together." And she said, "You went to Kamehameha?" And I said, "No, we went to West Point." And she's like, "Oh," she didn't really care. It wasn't about West Point. It was about Kamehameha. I thought that was my introduction to high schools, and on the, let's start with that conversation. I said, "No, I went to Maryvale High School in Buffalo, New York." She's like, "Oh yeah, so what?" I thought that was cool. So Taylor, that's what brought me here. It was this affinity, my son. Now my daughter lives on the Big Island with her husband, and she has 2 brand new twin identical boys that were born, and they have middle names that are Hawaiian. One's Hoku, and the other one is Kealoha. And Auntie Bay now calls them by their Hawaiian names. So my guess is they may lose their first names and they may just go by their Hawaiian names, which would be a wonderful thing. So, so what brought me to Chaminade is specifically Vaughn was serving as the chairman of the board, and he said, "Talk to Brother Bernie and see if it's something that interests you." I got on the board, did that for 4 years, and then Dr. Babington said, "You know what? I think you'd be fabulous in this Hogan job," and the rest is history. Great question. Thanks.
Thank you for answering. And I just wanted to, again, thank you for sharing your experiences. It sounds like you had a very amazing and interesting life. So thank you for sharing that with us.
So far, I'm looking for some more stories. So if you got any, let me know. I'm happy to share them.
Looking forward to those stories.
Okay. I know Pono's got a question, so I'm waiting for his.
I have a question for you, Dr. Panzarella.
Please.
You, since being back in Hawaii, and I'm assuming you'll be here for a while,
Oh, yeah.
do you have plans? Do you have plans to kind of learn about the Pacific Island cultures or some of the Asian cultures, or travel maybe to those areas?
So my smart answer is, of course not. Why would I know I know everything. I've been everywhere. Yes, that's my desire. I would love to, that's my, like, I feed off that, learning about the different cultures. And I want to travel. I want to go everywhere. I want to learn the differences. You go to the Polynesian Cultural Center. What an amazing place just to get a taste of the differences, and what I know and my respect for different cultures that are so close together proximity wise, but they're so different, right? It's nuances sometimes that make the differences, and it's respect for those differences and addressing those differences to say that, because somebody tells me, oh, we're Pacific Islanders. Oh, okay, I got that. But there are a lot of things that are so different about those cultures inside them. Even within that culture, even within Samoa, even within, even Kauai, there's just so much. Wherever you go, it's to understand that that's just that's the power of cultural intelligence, I think. So if you've got any, was that Kevin or Ed that asked that? Edward? Yeah. So give me a budget and figure it out. I'd love to go places and go check it out. Any other questions?
I have a question. Being that you've been basically everywhere in the world, and I don't know how much, I'm just gonna ask, what were some similarities or differences that you recognize with people, college age folks?
So that's a great question. Actually, I'm looking forward to it sometime when somebody says, that's a really bad question. I've never heard people say that. So but that's a really good question. And I like that. Let me tell you, the first thing I thought of when you said that was, I was in Jordan, where supposedly they believe that Christ was born someplace, and they show you where Christ was born right there. Well, you can argue exactly where it was. But while I was there, it was about a week, I think, I talked to a lot of young people, and I have a lot of friends from Israel as well. And it's so hard for me to accept this, that there's such in the world, proximity between Israel and Jordan, there's a little stream that separates them, that people think so much alike, but they won't admit that. The languages are so close, but they won't admit that. There's so much about the construct of time, the way they frame history, the way they critically think sometimes. And I guess we could pick different cultures in different places, that there are some things that stitch them together. So yes, there are cultural differences that we could point out, but there are things that bring them together as well. There was something else about your question that piqued my interest about the way young people approach things. Yeah, it's different. Poland, for example, I would say after I spent 10 years there, I got to know the young people very well. They're do this, but generally, young Polish people are not shy about accepting the ways of their ancestors. Here's a culture, here's a country that disappeared from the face of the earth, disappeared from the map, let's say the political map. 3 times they were conquered, and 3 times they disappeared. We're not allowed to exist on the map. How does it happen that they did survive? Well, it's the young people. It's the young and old people bridging those generation gaps that got them to work together, where the culture, the history, the tradition, the values, the language, the humor, brings them all together and keeps them stitched together. How is it, I keep asking this question, how is it after living there for 10 years? Almost every Polish person I know, old and young, if you have a cup of tea with them, how is it that they take their spoon after they stir their coffee or tea or whatever it is, flip it upside down and put it to the right side of the saucer? Think about something so simple like that, but everybody does it. But they disappeared from the map. They were not allowed to have their customs and traditions. How is it they all know the same stories, have the same jokes, they know they have the same humor, the songs that survive, the language that survives, the Roman Catholic faith that has survived? It's powerful. How does that happen? And I think it's something inside the culture that brings them together. And I believe a large part of it is the religion, is the religious quality, is their faith that brings them together. That's a huge factor that one doesn't talk about much. Why is it the Middle East? People aren't worried about the Middle East ever banding together. Nothing's going to glue them together. It's not the Muslim faith. It's not the Arab traditions that's going to cause them to band together as this great Arab majority and take over the earth. And I'm speaking as an ignorant sort of historian, but I just don't think the religion is as strong as the Catholic faith in that case. So that's just I guess I like your question. I'm going to take the question, think about it more, and maybe come up with some more thoughtful responses to that thing. But that's a nice question about how the young people come together. Okay. Anything else?
I have a question. But yes, thank you for our session today. I learned a lot. I guess like my question is more so geared towards adjustment, because you've moved so many times, and like I've lived in 3 different places, and right now I think is probably the most challenging. Currently I live in the Philippines, and it's been like a year and a half of just like extreme adjustment, and probably the most difficult out of all the places I've lived. So if you had like advice or quick tips for people who maybe move so often, or who are thinking of moving to a place where they don't really know so much about the culture, or like they don't know too much about like being on their own, or they don't know a lot of people that are in that specific area, like what are some tips that you can offer to kind of help with coping with the quick movement?
I wish I could tell you that was a bad question, but it was a great question. And I haven't been asked that one in a long time, Savannah. Savannah, right?
Yes.
Thanks. Tips for moving. Okay. If you were to ask my kids that question, so we moved as a family, my wife and I, 25 times, I think it is now. Most of those are cross borders, different overseas. The kids were moving, at least each one of them, 3 kids, probably 5, 6 of those countries. So a couple of ways to approach the question. One of the things that was always helpful was to learn a language ahead of time. I feel like language is one of those things that helps, but it's not the only thing. And you can speak French all day long, but if I arrive in France speaking French to an ability that I think I have and not feel welcome, sometimes it's a cultural thing. Now, I'm gonna ask you a question first. Are you in Philippines now because that's your country of origin, or if it's just a business thing or a school thing? Why are you there?
Just a school thing.
Okay.
So I actually graduated from Chaminade last year,
Okay.
but I moved out here right after graduation.
So Savannah, I've learned that no matter what I do, it takes me at least 11 to 13 months to feel comfortable. It's hard. The first year and a half is really hard. I don't care how many times you've done it. And it's your predisposition to change. One of my sons had a very difficult time with change. The other 2 loved it. I would call them agents of change. The other guy, we had to work with him carefully before a move and prepare him for the move, saying, here's what you're going to experience, here's what it's going to be like. And that helped a lot. But it took us several moves to make that happen. Anytime you rip a young person out of a school and put them in another high school, all the dynamics with high schools, you can imagine. It's unfair to put somebody in 3 high schools. 2 high schools, bad enough. You know, 1 is ideal, but 2 is probably the minimum. And if you can do 2 and 2, that's good. Or 1 and 3. But 3 and 1, that's a recipe for disaster. So language helps. Most cultures, most places, countries have a kind of program, if you will, a training program, something that eases people into them. Here are the customs, traditions. Here are things you need to know. Here's what's going to make your life easier. This is how you pay a telephone bill, which can be so frustrating. This is how you get a bank account. It can be so frustrating, right? Some cultures, it's ridiculous. All the paperwork, stack of paperwork this deep to get a driving license. Painful, painful. You know, I let my American driving license lapse and I was in Poland. I actually had to go through a training course in Poland, in Polish, with a Polish driver, and then take a test in Poland, in Polish, 200 questions. Who's got 200 questions on their test, right? The expectation is, I'm sorry to say this, my Polish friends, it's true, their expectation is that you'll cheat. Guess what? It's not in my, I can't do it. It's not in my ethics. I can't cheat. So I had to study really, really hard to take these 200 ridiculously hard questions and then get behind the wheel with this elderly Polish gentleman in the most difficult Polish situations that are crazy in the middle of Warsaw and pass by the skin of my teeth, you know? So yeah, I feel for you. It's not easy and take it slow, but once you can take those personal conveniences off and get the, you know, where do I buy milk? Where do I buy my food? How do I order? How about this one? How do you order a pound of salami or a quarter a pound or whatever? And it's going to that market and just using the words. And sometimes it's just, but the fun part is the decoding. Once you decode a language or decode a sentence or something or a sign that you read, a billboard, it's like, hey, I know what that says now. I can figure that out. It's those little things that make it worthwhile. So I took a note, tips. I think that'd be a good one. You know, what tips are generally acceptable to making life a little easier, but sorry, it's hard. Good luck, Savannah. Anybody else?
I may have missed this. I was taking a call earlier, but if it's fair to ask, like, your most favorite versus your, I wouldn't say least favorite, but like some place that you kind of wish you reevaluated living in before you decided to live there.
Yeah, that's a bad question.
Oh.
Oh, I just wanted to say that for him.
I know, because you never say that.
Right, I never say that. But I get asked that a lot. And let me answer it. I'll answer it my way, but first I want to answer it my wife's way. As a psychologist, she loves to say, oh, it's where I live right now. Because she's moved more than I have. She's lived, because as a child, she moved 10 or 11 more times. So she's lived 33 different places, right? So she'll tell you, where I am now, home is my favorite place. But I would tell you, living in Rome, Italy for 2 years was awesome. My family of origin is Sicily, and so I felt like I was home. My wife said I drove differently. I drove like a maniac, like an Italian. I eat like an Italian. I use my hands like an Italian more, and I love Italy. It's chaotic, it's nutty, it's me, and I loved Rome. There were no, and of all the places we've lived, none of them bad. Fascinating. UAE 6 years, fascinating to learn another culture, another faith, another totally set of rules. I love it. It's been we try to get the most out of all these countries. Least favorite place? Rwanda, 1994. That was my least favorite place to visit. Yeah, I was there in 94. That was my least favorite place. I want to go back to Rwanda now that I've heard it's changed quite a bit, but that was a horrible place to be in 1994. Anything else?
One last question I had real fast. If you could just shortly give a yes or no, is this cultural intelligence class going to be a master's only class, or is it going to be available for undergrads?
I don't know. What do you think? I haven't decided.
Both. I don't know.
I would be very interested in taking that class if you were going to do an undergrad class. Just wanted to put that in there.
There's your answer.
Well, we did one session in ENT 301, Entrepreneurship 301. I think they enjoyed the stories. I didn't get into the academic or theoretical piece like I did today, but I did, I think, talk a little bit about the cultural intelligence. But yeah, I would like to talk more about that. I think there's a lot to be said for this. But thanks for that.
I am so sorry. I did have one final question.
Don't be
As
sorry.
for your, you mentioned your book. I'm very interested in your book that you are working on, and I would love to hear more about that, or when it would be completed, or how we can get access to it potentially. So could you give us a little bit more details about your book?
If I find a publisher that wants this, I will. I think there must be some value to an American who's lived his almost entire life overseas and coming back to America, where I feel like a stranger in my own country, right? I feel very, and Hawaii I have lived on the mainland since, other than language school for Russian, flight school to learn how to fly helicopters, a mid-career course in the military, and one other year I did something. Other than those 4 years, I've not lived in the mainland my entire life, unless I was a kid, a young person growing up. So I started by saying my brain's been rewired. So I think there'd be some value in me bringing this, not only about these cultures, but also about my observations about our own culture, about the American culture as well. I'm not too kind on it sometimes. I'm pretty rough on it in terms of the way I observe it. We didn't talk about individualistic versus collectivist cultures, but American culture is very individualistic, as opposed to higher context collectivist kind of cultures where it's more about community, it's more about team, it's more about us, not about me. It's more about, in the collectivist, it's more about family. That comes first. Why is it, and maybe Savannah, you can talk to this for a second, but why is it I'm in the Middle East for 6 years, and it's kind of strange to me that all the service sector is pretty much dominated by Filipinos and Filipinas, right? And a lot of them are sending money back because they can't earn the money in the Philippines. They send money back from being nurses and in the service sector back to their home countries. Most Americans can't understand that, why they send so much of their money back. Why would you do that? In ENT 301, we had a lecturer who's a very close friend of our family. I have talked about her before, Duretti, unbelievable woman, right? She's 29 years old, and in 2 years, she's built herself up into be the CEO of this little company on adult foster care homes. And she's made quite a bit of money in 2 years, working so hard. What is she doing with her profits? She's building a 6-story building in Adama, back in her hometown in Ethiopia. She's giving all of her money back because people are constantly emailing her. They know she's successful, and they're saying, hey, I need money. And she's saying, it's my obligation. I have to give them money. And I said, not really, not all your money. Maybe save a little bit for yourself. But that's hard for us to understand. This is about being culturally intelligent. So I have to step back and say, wait a minute, this is part of her culture. She's being successful as a result of this. She's seen as successful by giving money back. But it's hard for a lot of Americans to understand that. So, any comments or questions?
I just wanted to comment on that because it's very common in also Pacific Island cultures. And I'll speak for me. I think for me, giving back home or sending money back home isn't so much of a difference because so much of my identity is my culture and my family. So the two are not so much of a disconnect.
So let me ask you a question then. And maybe we should take this offline sometime because I really want to learn more about this feeling. What if you didn't? How would you be observed inside yourself? How would you observe yourself? Or how would your friends or your family observe you if you ended up making money very successfully or not, or just what you're doing and didn't share it? What would be the end result?
That's not even a
consideration.
No.
So you don't know anybody who a Pacific Islander who lives outside the culture who does not share in this tradition of giving back?
Not close related or know enough to know that they
I
don't,
love
they don't know why, but
it. I
that's
love
not
it.
even a, that's not even an, that would not cross my mind.
I love it. Okay. Yeah, I want to learn more. I'm very curious.
Okay, so if no one else has any more questions, we'll transition into announcements now. I'd like to open up to anyone on campus ministry, OSAL, CSGA. If you guys have any announcements, feel free to share.
Hi. Oh, sorry, my camera. I have some announcements. Sorry, I'm a little bit sick, so I'm just gonna cover.
Should I put my mask on?
But I have pretty much all the announcements. But if anybody wants to add on, let me share my screen here. Hopefully it works. Okay.
I hope you're feeling better.
Thank you. Can everyone see that? Okay. So our first, our next, we want to thank Dr. Roy Panzarella for his amazing Share the Joy on Cultural Intelligence. Our next Share the Joy is going to be Wednesday, October 14th, and it's the Joy of Mary with Brother Jesse O'Neill. Jeremiah is going to be facilitating that one, and you guys are all welcome to come. I do encourage and that you invite somebody new to come and join you. That would be the challenge, I guess, for all you Share the Joyers, to go and share the joy and invite someone to come. And all of you guys are welcome. Again, it's not just open to students, but it's faculty, staff, and just anybody that we want to share the joy with. This is just a joy initiative for this pandemic. So again, next week, Wednesday, same time, same room. This coming Sunday, we have White Sunday. We will have regular mass live stream at 10 a.m., but LOS is going to be doing their White Sunday at 6:30 p.m., which will also be live streamed. They will have their dances pre-recorded and shared during that time, and then we'll also upload it onto their web, to a link on our website under worship for LOS, so you'll be able to watch it then as well if you miss it. I have an announcement for so I took a lot of stuff from our Instagrams, but CUH Advising has their study abroad and study away fair tomorrow at 11:20 a.m. There's a Zoom room if any of you guys have any questions or would like to check that out and would like to study abroad at Dayton or St. Mary's. The tutoring has a math Q&A, and that's on Friday. So this is the information. Please follow them on Instagram. I'm putting all their Instagram handles so you guys can follow them as well. We have our fourth nights every Monday at 6:30. The topic changes from time to time, but please come check us out. You can find the link on our IG. So please follow us. On October 23rd at 11 a.m., we have St. Luke Blessings for the School of Nursing, Healthcare Professions. It will also be live streamed through our Facebook, and you guys are all invited to attend. It's not just for the nursing, but for everybody as well. The World of Dance Clubs are actually doing October workshops. So this is open to everybody. This is a new thing that OSAL is doing, which is going to be kind of fun. They're going to do different dances on each time, and they have a different member teaching different cultural dances. So definitely check them out if you're interested in learning a dance. And the great thing about it is because it's on Zoom, you can turn off your camera and do it at home, and that'd be kind of fun. So I'm definitely going to try check out some of those events to learn as well. There was a voter registration on October 14th. I think it's I'm not sure whose event is this, but I posted it out, but I saw it on our events calendar, but definitely check that out. It is election season, so this is a great time, and definitely be a part of that and register to vote. OSAL is doing a Chaminade Mass Singer. So they're really trying to really engage you guys in singing and dancing. So this is a great opportunity. If you want to sign up to be a contestant, they're having signups from October 6th to the 18th. And it's going to be kind of fun. So you can scan their QR code for more information. And then they also have a October Step Challenge, which is a health and wellness initiative for them. And they want us to really track our steps. So you can use their QR code to start tracking your steps. And this is really for you guys to really get into fitness, because I think a lot of us have been on screen on our butts, just kind of like looking at screen. So if you want, they want you to get out there and start walking around and like really being more active. I think that's it. Oh, and then we have for Chaminade tutoring, put this Be Kind to Your Mind. That's Thursday, October 15th from 1 to 2. This is the room ID. And Colleen, the tutor, is going to share some tips about chemistry and conduct and activities to help with de-stressing, because it is a very stressful time. I think that's all the announcements. I don't know if anybody else has any announcements for any of the other departments, CSPB, you guys want to share?
I'll share real fast. Just for the sake of time, I'll also share my screen. Oh, never mind, can't share screen. But anyway, so if you check our Chaminade, oh, just kidding, thank you. So just real quick, my internship drop-in sessions or advising sessions are still ongoing every Thursday until the Thursday before Thanksgiving. You can either hop on between 11 and 12 or between 5:30 and 6:30. The Zoom ID is the same each time. We also have our fall internship fair next week, Wednesday from 11 to 3. That's the order that you see on your screen in which our presenters are presenting. They have about 20 to 25 minutes just to kind of go over who they are, where they are, any opportunities that they have and when they have them. And there's also a built-in Q&A session as well. I know it seems like a really long time. Usually our career fairs or internship fairs are 11:30 to 1:30, but this is our first time doing virtuals, so that's why it's from 11 to 3, back to back with 5 to 10 minutes in between for breaks and transitioning time. So yeah, that's all I have. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, so now I'd just like to thank you, Dr. Panzarella. I've certainly learned a lot from your many stories you shared, and I'm sure I can speak on behalf of our audience here today that we all gain some cultural intelligence and be a little bit more aware of whenever we go to different places or even in our own communities. So yeah, again, thank you, Dr. Panzarella. And also I would like to thank, yes, also I'd like to thank all of you participating and coming to listen in to the Share the Joy event. And before we end, I'd like to turn it over to Eddie for the closing prayer.
Thank you, Kevin. Okay. So again, as we start all things at Chaminade, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Thank you, Lord, for every joy and happiness you share with us. We are always reminded of these experiences through the places and people we encounter. Let us remember those brave individuals near and far that have dedicated their lives in service of freedom and peace for all. We ask you, Lord, to watch and protect all of our brothers and sisters who are in need of your mercy. And thank you, and please continue to bless us throughout our academic year. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Thank you all for signing on and participating in our Share the Joy event. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Can we just give a round of applause for our host as well, Eddie and Kevin, for doing such a great job. Thank you, guys. If there are any other students in the future that would like to help host, there is an opening next week for the Joy of Mary, just FYI. But again, thank you all so much. And thank you, Dr. Roy, for we could go on for days on this topic. And I hope you'd be open to coming for another Share the Joy sometime in the future. Great topic.
Jeremiah, happy to do it. Just let me know.
Absolutely. God bless.
God bless
Thank
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.